It might sound like a broken record to say that humans have suffered a lot, but pain isn't just a part of life, it defines it. And when it comes to suffering, we might just take the crown, not just because we feel it, but because we've engineered it, crafted it, perfected it even. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world at various hours of the night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's slightly morbid journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up roughly 430,000 years ago in what would someday become Spain. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, well, that might not last very long. You open your eyes to find yourself in a cave, surrounded by others of your kind. Homo heidelbergensis, not quite Neanderthal, definitely not Homo sapiens. The air is damp, cool, and carries the earthy scent of soil and stone. Your community is small, resources are scarce, and tensions can run high. You might notice one of your cave mates eyeing that stone axe a bit too intently. Little do you know, you're about to become what scientists would one day identify as the oldest murder victim in human history. 2 identical holes will soon mark your skull. Not from a fall, not from an animal attack, but from one of your own kind. And this is just how some days ended in prehistoric times. It only gets worse from here. The oldest murder case. Let's talk about that unfortunate Homo heidelbergensis individual for a moment. Their remains were discovered in a Spanish cave, and what made archaeologists take particular notice were the 2 identical holes in their skull. At first, researchers thought perhaps this poor soul had fallen and hit their head on a sharp rock, but the symmetry of those wounds told a different story. No animal in Spain at the time could have created such precise injuries. What they did resemble, however, were the marks left by stone axes, tools wielded by other hominins. This 430,000-year-old murder victim represents the oldest known case of homicide in our evolutionary history. The cave where they were found contained thousands of other hominin bones, many showing signs of similar trauma. Scientists now believe this location may have been one of the earliest designated burial sites, where bodies were deposited regardless of how they met their end. For our unfortunate friend, that end likely came during a fight over resources or territory. It's a somber reminder that violence has been part of our story since before we even existed as a species. The impulse to harm one another isn't a modern invention. It's embedded in our evolutionary past, a shadow that has followed us for hundreds of thousands of years. The double predator attack. If you think being murdered by your own kind sounds bad, wait until you hear about the individual scientists have designated as O7, a member of Homo habilis who lived in East Africa approximately 1.8 million years ago. Homo habilis was one of the oldest and smallest human species, standing only about 4 feet tall. Their diminutive stature made them particularly vulnerable in a landscape teeming with predators. And poor O7. Well, he had the profound misfortune of encountering not one, but 2 different apex predators in quick succession. Picture this. O7 is crouched by a wetland, perhaps getting a drink or looking for food. Without warning, the water erupts as the largest true crocodile species to ever exist. Crocodylus forbianasoni launches an attack. This wasn't just any crocodile, we're talking about a 25-foot 2-ton living nightmare. O7 manages to turn away quickly, but not quickly enough. The massive reptile catches his left leg, leaving enormous puncture marks and tearing parts of the limb clean off. In the sweltering heat of ancient Africa, such a wound would have been a death sentence, even if he somehow managed not to bleed out immediately. But nature, in its infinite cruelty, wasn't finished with 07. As he struggled with his catastrophic injury, a second predator, likely a leopard or similar big cat, attacked from behind, sinking its teeth into the back of his skull and leaving distinctive grooves in the bone. The fossil evidence shows no signs of healing on either wound, telling us that 07 died quickly. Some researchers believe he may have been caught in a rare dual attack, turning to face the crocodile, while a feline predator seized the opportunity to strike from behind. Such a death is mercifully impossible today. The giant crocodile species is extinct, and the chances of being caught between two different apex predators are virtually non-existent in our modern world. But for our ancient relatives, such horrific ends were an ever-present possibility. Death by vitamin A. Not all prehistoric deaths were violent, though some were equally unpleasant in different ways. Take the case of KNMER 1808, a 1.7 million year old Homo erectus discovered in Kenya. This individual, believed to be female, showed unusual bone abnormalities that puzzled scientists when her partial skeleton was uncovered in 1974. Her bones displayed evidence of excessive growth patterns and signs of prolonged, massive bleeding, yet there were no obvious wounds. After careful analysis, researchers concluded she had suffered from hypervitaminosis A, vitamin A toxicity. While vitamin A is essential for health, excessive amounts can be deadly. The patterns in her bones suggested she had endured this condition chronically before it eventually killed her. In modern times, vitamin A toxicity rarely proves fatal, but without medical knowledge or treatment, this Homo erectus woman slowly succumbed to symptoms that likely included weakness, intense headaches, sloughing off of skin, loss of hair and teeth, and excruciating joint pain. The question naturally arises, where did she get so much vitamin A? All signs point to carnivore liver, a well-known source of this vitamin. Some predator livers, like those of polar bears, can contain enough vitamin A to theoretically supply a human with 150 years worth of the nutrient. Without knowing the dangers, she likely consumed these toxic amounts repeatedly over time, suffering a slow, painful decline as her body deteriorated. It's a death that reminds us how even something as seemingly benign as a vitamin can become deadly in the wrong circumstances. Death from above. When we think of prehistoric dangers, our minds typically conjure images of saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, or massive bears. We rarely look up, but for one unfortunate Australopithecus child about 2.8 million years ago, death came from the skies. The Taung child, as this individual is known, breaks our strict Homo rule, but the uniqueness of this case warrants inclusion. This Australopithecus child was found with horrific injuries to its face and head, puncture marks in the bottom of eye sockets, and deep scratches across the cranium. These injuries match precisely with those seen in modern monkeys that had fallen prey to eagles, suggesting that a large predatory bird had sunk its beak and talons into the child's eyes and head. Death would have come quickly, at least we hope, before the child was carried off to be consumed. Adding to the mystery, only the skull was recovered, found in a remote cave in the Kalahari Desert, with no other bones nearby. This has led to a fascinating hypothesis. After killing the child, the predatory bird may have used the skeleton to build a nest. Eventually, the skull became dislodged and, by sheer coincidence, rolled into a nearby cave where it would remain undisturbed for millions of years before being discovered. is a sobering reminder that for our ancient relatives, danger lurked not just on the ground, but in the air above as well. The next time you look at birds soaring overhead, perhaps you'll see them a bit differently, knowing their ancestors once preyed upon ours. The mass, drowning Homo erectus was one of the most successful human species ever to exist, and certainly the longest lived. They were the first to leave Africa, spreading across Europe and Asia, where they made their final stand on the island of Java. The youngest erectus fossils ever discovered, dating to about 110,000 years ago, come from this Indonesian island. Intriguingly, all of them seem to have perished in a single mass death event. Nearly a century ago, researchers working on Java unearthed a graveyard containing over a dozen erectus specimens, all adults, their remains tangled together in one location. With no evidence of disease, physical wounds, or old age, scientists concluded they had all died simultaneously from a single cause. The sediment surrounding the fossils provided a crucial clue. These individuals had been caught in a flood. The current theory suggests their bodies were swept away by floodwaters to a narrowing in a river where they became trapped in a log jam, or rather a macabre carcass jam, which eventually fossilized. More specifically, some researchers believe a volcanic eruption triggered lava flows, deadly mixtures of water and volcanic debris that rush down a volcano's slopes. These flows routinely overflow rivers and can travel more than 60 miles, causing devastating local destruction. In modern times, similar events have killed tens of thousands of people. If this hypothesis is correct, these fossils might represent an actual extinction event in progress, the last known members of Homo erectus meeting their end together in a violent rush of water and volcanic debris. While volcanic eruptions weren't responsible for the general extinction of erectus, for this final population, it may have been the closing chapter in their nearly 2 million year story. It's both tragic and poetically fitting. A species that had weathered ice ages, predators, and changing environments for longer than any other human species, finally overcome by one of nature's most formidable forces, the hyena victims. Among the most horrifying prehistoric deaths were those inflicted by an extinct giant hyena species, Pachycrocuta. These weren't the cackling scavengers we know today. They were massive predators weighing up to 330 pounds, rival to lionesses in size. Their power was concentrated in their disproportionately large heads and jaw muscles, allowing them to bite with tremendous force, enough to crush bone, and crush they did, as evidenced by the remains found at the Zhoukoudian Peking Man site in China. This cave yielded more than 28 Homo erectus specimens, and approximately 67% of them bore bite marks consistent with Pachycrocuta attacks. Bite marks hardly conveys the extent of the damage, though. Many of these human remains were completely obliterated. Skulls crushed, bones splintered, likely in the hyena's attempts to access nutritious marrow, or simply devour entire skeletal elements. When these specimens were first discovered, along with man-made tools, researchers initially thought they might be evidence of cannibalistic murders by other Homo erectus. Further analysis revealed the truth was even more disturbing. The cave had been a Pachycrocuta den, with humans as prey rather than residents. This site serves as a sobering reminder that our ancestors weren't always at the top of the food chain. Despite being skilled hunters themselves, erectus in prehistoric China was still vulnerable to these lion-sized hyenas. There's even a hypothesis that hyenas prevented humans from expanding into certain territories for extended periods. Even today, hyenas occasionally become man-eaters. Imagine facing their extinct giant cousins with nothing but primitive spears for protection. It makes one grateful that Pachycrocuta no longer stalks the youth. Death by tooth infection. Not all prehistoric deaths involved dramatic encounters with predators. Sometimes the quieter killers proved equally deadly. Such was the case for the Turkana boy, KNMWT 15000, another Homo erectus specimen who lived in Kenya between 1.6 and 1.5 million years ago. While erectus had developed impressive tools and possibly even controlled fire by this time, what they hadn't mastered was dental hygiene. The Turkana boy developed a severe abscess after his milk teeth fell out, and his molars and premolars grew in awkwardly. The colliding teeth damaged the surrounding tissues, leading to an infection that never healed. Based on the fact that these were baby teeth being replaced, scientists believe he was only 8 or 9 years old when he died. Likely from septicemia, blood poisoning caused by bacterial infection. Even today, sepsis is challenging to treat. In prehistoric times, it was virtually always fatal. The location where his remains were found suggests that, weakened by infection, he collapsed face first in swampy terrain and died floating face down in the murky water. Even in death, his indignities continued. Researchers believe his body was trampled by a herd of animals, pressing him into the muddy swamp floor, where he would eventually fossilize. Later, volcanic ash from a local eruption covered part of his skeleton, creating a tomb that would preserve his remains for over 1 million years. As if all this weren't enough, reanalysis of his skeleton revealed he also suffered from a severely herniated disc in his spine. Had a dental infection not killed him, his compromised mobility would have left him vulnerable to predators. It's a stark reminder that many conditions we consider manageable inconveniences today were potential death sentences for our ancestors. A simple tooth infection, something we might treat with antibiotics and a root canal, cost this young boy his life. The perils of prehistoric existence. When we consider the full spectrum of ways our ancient relatives met their ends, a humbling truth emerges. Survival was never guaranteed, and death often came in forms we can scarcely imagine today. From the oldest documented murder 430,000 years ago, to being torn apart by extinct megapredators, from slow poisoning by vitamin A, to mass drownings in volcanic mudflows. The prehistoric world was filled with dangers both dramatic and mundane. For every hominin who survived long enough to reproduce, countless others fell victim to predators, environmental disasters, infections, or conflicts with their own kind. Each fossilized bone with tooth marks, each skull bearing evidence of trauma, each skeleton showing signs of disease, tells a story of struggle, and ultimately failure to overcome the challenges of their time. And yet, despite these countless tragedies, some lineages persisted. Through ice ages and interglacials, through shifts in climate and ecosystem, through periods of scarcity and abundance, our ancestors somehow endured. The fact that we exist at all is testament to their remarkable resilience. Perhaps there's a certain comfort in knowing that, for all the dangers we face in the modern world, we've escaped many of the perils that plagued our forebears. No longer do we need to scan the skies for predatory birds or keep watch for giant hyenas. Modern medicine has conquered many of the infections that once proved fatal, and our position at the top of the food chain is largely secure. Still, these ancient deaths remind us of our fragility and the indifferent brutality of nature. They connect us to our distant past and help us appreciate the relative safety and comfort we enjoy today. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you'll spare a thought for those who came before us, whose struggles and sacrifices, and yes, sometimes horrific deaths, are part of the long story that led to you, listening to this very recording. Sleep well, knowing that unlike the Turkana boy or the victims of Pachacracuta, you'll almost certainly wake up tomorrow ready to face another day in a world far less perilous than the one our ancestors knew. Sweet dreams, if you can have them after all that. And if you're still awake, let's continue our journey through the grim realities of prehistoric existence. The slow decline. While dramatic deaths by predation or disaster make for compelling narratives, the reality is that many of our ancient relatives likely succumbed to much slower, more mundane causes. Chronic illnesses, malnutrition, parasitic infections. These silent killers probably claimed far more lives than crocodiles or hyenas ever did. Consider the challenges of simply finding enough to eat. Before agriculture, humans and pre-humans relied entirely on what they could hunt, gather, or scavenge. Seasonal changes, droughts, or simple bad luck could mean the difference between sustenance and starvation. Fossilized teeth often show evidence of growth interruptions, lines called linear enamel hyperplasia that indicate periods of severe stress, usually nutritional deficiency during childhood. These markers tell us that many individuals experience multiple episodes of near starvation before reaching adulthood. Parasites would have been another constant companion. Internal parasites like tapeworms and hookworms drain nutrients from already marginal diets. External parasites like ticks and fleas transmitted diseases. With no understanding of germ theory and no access to anti-parasitic medications, our ancestors simply had to endure these infestations and the diseases they brought. Even minor injuries could prove fatal in a world without antibiotics. A simple cut, if infected, could lead to sepsis. Broken bones might heal improperly, limiting mobility and making hunting or gathering more difficult. Dental abscesses, as we saw with the Turkana boy, could spread infection throughout the body. Childbirth, too, was enormously risky. Fossil evidence suggests that maternal mortality was high, with many young women's skeletons showing evidence of death during or shortly after giving birth, and a wider pelvises needed to birth large-brained infants, combined with the narrower pelvises needed for efficient bipedal walking, created an evolutionary dilemma with deadly consequences for many mothers. For those who survived these challenges and reached old age, perhaps 40 or 50 years by prehistoric standards, degenerative conditions would have made life increasingly difficult. Arthritis, especially in the spine, knees and hands, is commonly seen in older hominin fossils. Without pain relief or assistive devices, these conditions would have eventually rendered individuals unable to contribute to their group's survival. In such cases, the final cause of death might have been as simple as exposure to the elements, inability to flee from predators, or decision by the group to move on without the burden of caring for someone who could no longer keep up. These slower deaths rarely leave clear evidence in the fossil record, but they were likely far more common than the spectacular ends we've discussed earlier. In many ways, they connect us more deeply to our ancestors, reminding us that for most of human history, life was a constant struggle against forces beyond our control. Cannibalism among our ancestors. Among the darker chapters in prehistoric human experience is the practice of cannibalism. Multiple sites across Europe, Asia, and Africa have yielded hominin remains bearing telltale marks of having been processed for consumption by their own kind. At the Grandolina site in Spain, dating to around 800,000 years ago, archaeologists discovered the remains of at least 6 individuals of Homo antecessor with clear evidence of cannibalistic practices. Bones showed cut marks from stone tools in locations consistent with defleshing, along with percussion marks where bones were broken to extract marrow. What's particularly chilling is the methodical nature of these marks. They're indistinguishable from those found on animal bones at the same site, suggesting these humans were processed using the same butchery techniques applied to game animals. Was this survival cannibalism during times of extreme resource scarcity? Ritual consumption of the dead? or something more sinister, perhaps violence between groups with the vanquished becoming food for the victors. The archaeological record cannot tell us the motivations, only the actions. Similar evidence has been found at Neanderthal sites like Krapina in Croatia and Mula Giersi in France. The Klassies Rivermouth Caves in South Africa contain early Homo sapiens remains with comparable processing marks. This suggests cannibalism wasn't unique to any single human species, but may have been practiced by multiple hominin groups under certain circumstances. For the victims, death by cannibalism would have been particularly horrific. Not just the physical pain of being killed and dismembered, but perhaps also the psychological trauma of being treated as mere food by members of one's own species. Yet we should be cautious about judging these practices by modern standards. In a world where starvation was an ever-present threat, taboos against consuming human flesh may have been a luxury our ancestors couldn't always afford. For some groups, ritual cannibalism might have held spiritual significance we can no longer reconstruct. Whatever the reasons behind it, cannibalism represents one of the more disturbing ways our ancient relatives both died and dealt with their dead, a practice that, thankfully, has been largely abandoned in modern human societies. The ice mummy, Ötzi's violent end? While not as ancient as the previous examples, the death of a man who lived 5,300 years ago provides unusually detailed insights into violence in prehistoric times. In 1991, hikers in the Ötztal Alps discovered the frozen body of a man who would become known as Ötzi, the Iceman, the oldest naturally preserved human mummy ever found. Advanced scientific analysis revealed that Ötzi did not die peacefully. He was murdered, and in a particularly brutal fashion. An arrowhead was lodged in his left shoulder, having penetrated a major blood vessel. He also had a deep cut on his hand, a blow to the head, and multiple other injuries. The sequence of events in his final hours can be reconstructed with remarkable detail. Isotope analysis of his stomach contents shows he had eaten 2 meals in the hours before his death, one in a valley location and another at higher altitude. He appears to have been involved in a violent confrontation in the valley, during which he received a hand wound before fleeing up into the mountains. There, he was shot from behind with an arrow. The location of the arrowhead indicates it would have caused severe internal bleeding, but not immediate death. Weakened and bleeding internally, Ötzi likely collapsed in the snow, where hypothermia would have finished what the arrow began. DNA analysis of blood found on his equipment showed samples from at least 4 other individuals, suggesting he may have wounded or killed others before meeting his own end. Was this a tribal conflict? A personal vendetta? A robbery gone wrong? We may never know for certain. What we do know is that Ötzi's death was violent, painful, and likely the result of human conflict, proving that even after the development of agriculture and settled communities, our ancestors continued to face a threat of violence from their own kind. Unlike many prehistoric deaths, Ötzi's final moments are preserved in extraordinary detail thanks to the ice that entombed him. His remarkably preserved body, with its tattoos, clothing and toolkit, provides a window into not just how he died, but how he lived, making his violent end all the more poignant. The Shanidar Neanderthals, lives of hardship. Among the most moving prehistoric deaths are those of the Neanderthals found in Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq. Dating to between 65,000 and 35,000 years ago, these individuals tell a story of both hardship and compassion. Shanidar I, an older male, had survived injuries that would have been debilitating. A crushing blow to the left side of his head that likely caused blindness in one eye, the withered right arm that had been amputated above the elbow, and multiple fractures to his right leg and foot. that had healed but left him with a pronounced limp. Despite these severe disabilities, he survived for years after sustaining them, reaching an age of around 40, advanced for a Neanderthal. This suggests his community supported him, providing food and protection, even though he could not have contributed fully to hunting or other physically demanding tasks. He may have eventually died from natural causes, but his life tells us something powerful about Neanderthals' social bonds and their ability to care for one another. The fact that someone with serious disabilities could survive for years, that really challenges the old stereotype of Neanderthals as brutish, uncaring beings. They weren't just tough, they looked after their own. Another Neanderthal found in the same cave, known as Shanidar III, tells a different kind of story. He had a deep wound in his ribs, one that had started to heal, which means he lived for weeks after being injured. The wound looked like it came from a spear or projectile. Was this an early clash between Neanderthals and modern humans moving into the area? Maybe. But it could also have been a hunting accident, or even a conflict within his own group. Whatever happened, we know this much. His death wasn't quick. He likely died in pain, possibly from a punctured lung or a slow lingering infection. But Shanidar gives us more than just pain and violence. Some of the most famous Neanderthals from this cave were buried with what seems like great care. Shanidar IV, for example, was found with traces of pollen around him, suggesting that flowers had been placed with his body. Some scientists still debate that idea, but if it's true, it would be one of the earliest signs of a ritual burial. That's something deeply human. The Neanderthals of Shanidar remind us prehistoric death wasn't just about how people died, but about how they lived and how their communities responded. Even in harsh, unforgiving environments, these ancient relatives of ours showed compassion. They cared for the weak and honoured the dead. Final thoughts as you drift off. As you lie there, maybe feeling sleepy. Here's a thought to take with you. You are the end of a long, unbroken chain of survivors. Every single one of your ancestors managed to survive long enough to pass on their genes. They weren't eaten by giant hyenas. They didn't die from infections before having children. They weren't killed by falling rocks, bad water, or a spear in the back. By skill, by luck, or by the strength of their communities, they survived when so many others didn't. And so, when you look in the mirror, you're seeing the result of millions of years of perseverance. The fossil record, that's the story of all the branches that didn't lead to us, the cousins who didn't make it, but the stories help us understand the crucible that shaped who we are. So tonight, as you fall asleep, in a safe bed, with no predators nearby, no deadly infections creeping through your body, no fear of attack or starvation, take a moment to feel